Deci videoclipul ăsta se numește Poopgate, the most insane scandal that sounds fake. Și e vorba de un scandal care are legătură cu
Summer day in 2004, an incident so strange and disgusting occurred that it's hard to believe it actually happened. Chicago's Little Lady Ferry was doing one of its regularly scheduled tours down the Chicago River. Tourists on the top deck were observing the skyline when they looked up and noticed a large bus suspiciously parked on the Kinsey Street Bridge. As the ferry passed under the bridge, 800 pounds of human poop rained down on the ferry, drenching the passengers in literal human filth. People screamed and vomited.
De ce ai aruncat peste oamenii care trec cu vaporul pe sub pod excremente? Efectiv, literalmente le arunci în cap, îmi pare rău pentru cei care mănâncă.
As they tried to escape the unbearable smell, but they had nowhere to go. The bus immediately sped off after dumping its load, and if it weren't for two extremely important pieces of evidence, we may have never known why it happened, how it happened, or who to blame for what would eventually be known as Poopgate, or the Dave Matthews Band Chicago River incident. At around 1 o'clock p.m. on Saturday, August 8th, 2004, a line of 120 people began boarding the ferry called Chicago's Little Lady. With the tickets going for an affordable $25, it's the perfect way to relax and see the city. The passengers are a diverse group of people, senior citizens, journalists, mothers, in for a memorable experience. A newspaper reporter, Brett McNeil, is using it as a distraction for...
Poți să te duci, ești nebun, cu taică-ta, cu maică-ta, pe o barcă de-asta așa, to enjoy the evening și să-ți arunce căcat cineva în cap.
His complicated relationship. I had a girlfriend whose ex was visiting from Boston. We were just looking for something to do. I was a newer Tribune reporter and so worked a lot of those Sunday shifts, but I had a rare Sunday off. We decided to do a boat tour. It was truly beautiful, perfect weather. At that time, the river was not nearly as busy as it is now with just pleasure craft. It's such a beautiful day that all 120 passengers are considering walking out on the top deck to soak in the sun. As the ferry makes its way down the river, people are anticipating over 50 architectural landmarks to observe on their trip, including the Wrigley Building, the Willis and Tribune Towers, and Marina City. Chicago is incredibly proud of being an industrial heartland, and they've made efforts to preserve the older structures like the Kinsey Street Railroad Bridge, one of the first of its kind to raise up and let larger boats pass through the river. It's no longer in use, but it is technically still
cu gagică-ta pe marginea balustrada așa romantic și pățești asta pe bune, dar gândește să filmezi sau să-ți faci poze în timp ce îți cade căcatul în cap.
Functional and maintained as a historic landmark that's over 100 years old. It has since been replaced by the Kinsey Street Road Bridge that sits right next to it. It's important to note that the driving surface of the bridge is not made of concrete or asphalt, but rather a steel grating to prevent the buildup of heavy rain and snow. It's a genius feat of engineering. The water falls from the sky but passes through the holes in the bridge to the river below, and as a result, cars don't hydroplane and crash. It's safer for everyone, but unfortunately, the holes in the bridge's surface was what created the opportunity for the day in Chicago's history. At approximately 1:18 p.m., Chicago's Little Lady is heading towards the bridge. Everybody was sitting on the deck in plastic chairs, like deck chairs. Nobody was downstairs. Up above, passengers near the back of the Little Lady see a large black bus began traveling across the Kinsey Street Bridge. It temporarily stops and blocks out the sun at the bow of the ferry. Everything seemed normal until a cascade of liquid began spraying from what looks like the back of the bus. To guests like McNeil, this was weird but likely harmless. I was confused about what it was. I thought it was either a street sweeper or one of those trucks that you'll see with the big water tanks, and they use them to water the flower beds and the flowers along Michigan Avenue. That was my initial thought. Suddenly, the boat started traveling through what he called the Maid of the Mist. One drop fell and then another until the boat was almost completely covered in 800 pounds or 80 to 100 gallons of fluid in just a few short seconds. Now, the graphic that we have created is exaggerating. It probably looked more like brownish yellow raindrops, not necessarily large chunks of turds falling from the sky. And since there are no real photos or videos of the incident, we don't actually know what it looked like. This all happened pretty quickly. It's like a car crash. Things slow down. It's bewildering. Your mind is trying to process what it's just seen. The boat continued past the bridge, the bus disappeared south, and then there was like an unmistakable smell. Passengers began began to look at the brown and yellow liquid that was
What the
covering
fuck,
their
bro,
bodies head
cum
to toe.
arată?
Then it hits them. The liquid that's been poured all over their
Doamne.
faces, their clothes, getting in their eyes and mouths and ears is literal liquid shit. Some begin to scream, some yell in a fit of rage, while
Bă, așa zi de căcat să ai? Așa zi de căcat să ai? Ce situație de căcat, Doamne.
others run blindly in random directions before vomiting all over the upper and lower decks. One woman tries to console her baby as the sewage continues to cling and dry all over them, while the elderly and handicapped panic as they are unable to move away from their chairs, caked in cursed sludge from the mysterious bus. The ferry's 120 passengers are trapped on an island completely covered in human waste, and there's nowhere to go. Up on the bridge, the brown and yellow liquid is so thick that some remains on the steel grating to get picked up by rolling tires. Lynn LaPlante, who was driving on the bridge, describes it as an inescapable nightmare. She began vomiting outside of the car window
Ce vorbește așa happy când vorbește de faptul că a fost căcată pe cap?
and swerving violently as she was driving. She later described it as a new form of hell.
Making matters worse, Lynn was pregnant and
By the way, chat, deja este în drum spre mine comanda de shawarma. Ajunge în 5 minute.
eternally nauseous.
All of a sudden, it was like driving into a brick
am
wall
dat-o.
of smell. I don't know how else to put it. We didn't see anything visually, but when we got out of the car, it was all along the side of our car and in the wheel wells, just like raw sewage, just covered.
Back down below, the captain of the ferry orders the bar to give away free drinks to try and calm down the poop-covered crowd. She also puts the ferry in full throttle to get back to the port as soon as possible, but nothing drowns out the screams of dozens of waste-drenched victims. As soon as they return, the crowd flees the boat and onto the docks. All of the money spent on tickets was refunded to the soaked passengers, and the
Pe ce trecu să le dai bani înapoi? Și ce contează? Te piși pe aia $15 sau cât o plătit $10 să se ducă și ei pe... Oamenii au fost căcați în cap. Eu cred că au fost mai traumatizați. Nu cred că au fost vreodată. Ce ați face voi, bă, chat? Mai țineți minte că era riddle-ul ăla așa de copii mici în care ziceam, bă, frate, e o bară cu căcat. Nu, e o bară și sub e căcat. Te prins sau nu te prins? Sau cum era chestia aia? Era un riddle cu bara de căcat. Sigur îl știți. Era gen popular, toți copiii îl știau.
staff hurry up and wash every part of the boat to get it back up and running. And you would think they would
A, e o bară. Te-ai prins sau nu te-ai prins? Nu m-am prins. Atunci ai căzut în căcat. Așa
maybe
era, da,
shut
bravo.
down the ferry for the day, but no, they just cleaned up the boat and did another service at 3 o'clock. I can only imagine they thought, we'll give them a refund, they'll go take a shower, we'll be up and running for the next service, and nobody will ever think about this again. But unfortunately for them, this was already developing into a national news story.
It was like a downpour.
Captain Sonia Lund saw it, but passenger Mike Scarpelli was one of the people drenched in the deluge.
There were some older people on there that had limited mobility. They were doused from head to toe. Their hair was soaking wet, literally covered in urine and feces. There was a pregnant lady that could barely contain herself.
The crew knew exactly what to do. When they were alerted, they came back to the dock. The passengers, Bob Agram met them at the dock. The passengers disembarked.
Un collective class lawsuit contra orașului sau firmei cu autobuzul și EGG. Ar trăi oamenii ăia mai bine decât 5% din americani? Bă, sincer, chiar da. Chiar da, mai ales că America și sistemul sistemul legal, să zic așa, din America permite lawsuit-urile astea infecte. Au câștigat oamenii lawsuit că au căzut în McDonald's și au câștigat milioane.
gave them refund.
Gen 100% dacă se făcea un class lawsuit aveau, bine, nu milioane, dar aveau vreo câteva sute de mii.
But Scarpelli doesn't
Probabil de la
remember
oraș.
it that way. He says initially the tour guide gave them the option of turning around, and when dumbfounded, he told the guide to also call police. Scarpelli says the guide replied, "We're working on it."
No authorities ever got on the boat. There were no police present. Whether or not they came after the fact, I don't know.
The interviews after the incident sparked two different reactions: serious outrage and contagious laughter, because after all, poop is kind of funny. 5 of the victims actually went to Northern
E funny
Memorial
as fuck.
Hospital for tests due to likely
Bă, chat, auzi ce întrebare îmi pune cineva pe chat. Ce alegi, să mănânci un tort cu gust de cioacă sau o cioacă cu gust de tort? Ce alegeți, chat? Bă, sincer, eu cred că aleg tort cu gust de cioacă. Că măcar e tort, bro, știi ce zic? Mănânci tort at the end of the day. Acum, care e gust de cioacă, n-ai prins bățul mai scurt. Bine, bățul lung din ecuație l-ai prins, sincer îți zic. Voi ce ați alege? E o tort, clar, toată ziua.
Crash con donated €1. Will estiu pe la cubara sisioara, cara sonriente.
Da, și eu îl știu pe ăla, și eu îl știu pe ăla.
Pre-existing conditions and the taste of black water
Dar
still
ce ați alege, chat? Pe bune, ce ați alege? Tort cu gust de cioacă sau cioacă cu gust de tort? Hai, spuneți.
in their mouths. Exposure to this volume of sewage can cause gastroenteritis, respiratory infections, skin
Răspunsul 1, iau COVID și pot mânca liniștită.
infections,
Dar nu există gen workarounds. Ambele.
ear and sinus infections. You could get hepatitis A, UTIs, or even get parasites. An anonymous
Bă,
physician
e
at the
groaznic, bă, deci căcatul are o grămadă de boli, bro. O grămadă de paraziți, o grămadă de fecalele, gen, au o bă, e groaznic să se caci cineva pe tine. Nu știi ce fel de om e ăla. Nu știi ce fel de căcat ai pus pe tine, ai atins. Pare rău pentru ăștia care mănâncă pe bune. Mii de euro scuze.
hospital even pointed it out that this was enough to shock experienced healthcare professionals. Working in the hospital care setting, when something strange or scary or gross or concerning happens, that's where you go. In general, we're used to it. We're kind of jaded. We're not very impressed with scenarios that would gross a layperson out. But this one was... people were talking about it for a long time afterward in the department. Luckily, nobody would end up getting sick or suffering any long-term illnesses, as far as we know, but the city of Chicago had to find the suspect as soon as possible to avoid more bad press. There were so many questions. Why would someone do this? Was it deliberate or accidental? How did the driver manage to dump waste in a way that would scatter over an entire ferry and over 100 people? Most importantly, who the hell was in that bus? Chicago police had never conducted an investigation quite like this, but luckily they would discover a few key pieces of evidence that would eventually reveal the man who dumped 800 pounds of liquid turd. The Poopgate investigation had officially started. The Illinois Attorney General, Lisa Madigan, was out for blood to see what environmental laws had been violated. The first key piece of evidence was the discovery of the make and model of the vehicle, a modified 2003 Monaco Royale coach. The bus was more like a mansion on wheels, a luxury Class A diesel pusher at 45 feet in length. It had its own large shower, master bedroom, and tile floors. These buses usually have 50 to 100 gallon waste tanks, meaning it was more than capable.
Păi, mâncam tort. Păi nu era ceva în Dubai că plăteau femei să se cace pe ele? Ba da. Influencerițe chiar.
Of holding a massive amount of poop. But this is where it gets very interesting. According to McNeil, I happened to meet a guy who had one, a luxury coach. He bought this tour bus that happened to be Bob Seger's at one time. And so I was like, hey, these buses, can you remotely dump the toilets? And he said, absolutely. He showed me all about how you can do it from the driver's seat. So the technology exists to dump the toilets from the road, from behind the wheel under power, and it's existed for a long time. But it's still unclear if the driver was able to do this with just the press of a button. It's likely that in order for the driver to
Two girls one cup, da, man. Two girls one cup oricum a fost. A fost gen un videoclip foarte popular când eram noi copii.
Successfully dump out the waste from this Monaco Royale, he would have had to park, exit the vehicle, and run around to the two valves present near the back of the bus.
Bă, în India există în India sărbătoare în care se aruncă cu căcat de vacă. Căci căcatul de vacă pentru ei e sacru.
One valve was for the gray water that comes from sinks and showers, and the other valve was for black water packed with weapons-grade feces and fermented urine. The Royale had a state-of-the-art Sanicon waste system, which could help liquefy solids and allow dumping with ease. All he had to do was flip the pump switch while the black water valve was pulled open, and the sewage would cascade down as the driver ran back to his seat and continued driving across the Kinsey Street Bridge. Unfortunately for the suspect, law enforcement found their second piece of evidence from a surveillance photo that was able to confirm the Monaco Royale, which crossed the Kinsey Street Bridge at the same time the passengers were soaked. But the third key piece of evidence was a paper given to the authorities at the very start of their investigation. It was provided by one of the passengers at the back of the boat, who managed to write down both the state and license plate number as the sludge rained down on him. Police were shocked when they tracked the plate and discovered that the 2003 Monaco Royale belonged to a luxury tour bus for the Dave Matthews Band. And just like that, they found their first suspect, DMV bus driver Jerry Fitzpatrick.
I hear that you were the driver on the bus in Chicago that dumped its human waste.
You know, there was an incident of that happening, and I was in Chicago when that happened, but it was not me. I had nothing to do with it at all. I was accused of it, actually. Because I'm driving I was accused of it, and I just say that I didn't do that.
According to the Chicago Tribune, Fitzpatrick confirmed he was in Chicago with Matthews, whose band played the second of 2 shows at Alpine Valley in Wisconsin later that night. But the driver said he was parked in front of the Peninsula Hotel when the waste rained down from the bridge several blocks away. Fitzpatrick told the press, "There is no way I could be responsible for that. I haven't emptied the tank for days. Besides, we are very cautious about how we do that sort of thing." They also felt the need to clarify to the press, this band is very environmentally conscious. And to further clear his name, Jerry actually pushed a police sergeant named Paul Gardner to inspect the bus. He even gave Sergeant Gardner his phone to tell a reporter that his tank was almost full. However,
fanii trupei ălea ar plăti să fie pe barcă. Crezi că oamenii așa de delusional încât vor să fie gen artiștii lor favoriți se cace pe capul lor? I mean, nu știu de ce am întrebat chestia asta. Cred că răspunsul e da. Ia întrebare, bă. Întrebare de filozofie bună. Ce fandom credeți că ar fi cel mai predispus la a vrea din tot sufletul ca idolii lor să se cace pe capul lor? Eu cred că BTS, Swifties, Playboi Carti. Bă, Carti este pretendent, clar. BTS, Swifties. Swifties. Bie și Alin, bro. Hey, yo. Netspend fandom. TheRealRed fandom. Doamne ferește, n-aș face asta nici plătit, ești nebun. Ferească Sfântul. Dani Mocan. Ce bună. BTS 100%. K-pop fans. Bă, nu știu de ce, dar eu cred că mai repede fanii lui Carti. Da, fiți atenți aici. Hot take. Călin Georgescu fans. Ei, yo!
Please, I need this!
Ei, yo! Pokimane, da. White Knights, de pe Twitch mods, 100%, Discord mods, 100%.
the band had a total of 5 buses parked outside the Peninsula Hotel.
Hey, yo, bro.
And authorities were unsure of which one was the dumper. A band as popular as the Dave Matthews Band
Pauză un pic, stai să-mi iau
and will tour with multiple buses. One for the band members, maybe one for the crew, and 2 or 3 for equipment, all traveling separately to keep everything running on time. The band was leaving the Alpine Valley Music Theater, which is 2 hours north of Chicago. Now, according to RVDumpsites.net, there are a few different places the band could have stopped to discard the waste from the bus. Then again, this happened over 20 years ago, so we don't know if any of these current locations were available back then. We do know that money was definitely not the problem.
Am zis că hai să ne uităm la videoclipul ăsta că mănânc după cu alt video. Hello, bine ai venit.
Because even back then it only cost about $10 to empty the tank. Upon further investigation, authorities managed to confirm the exact bus that did the dumping. One of the passengers was the band's violinist, Boyd Tinsley, and the driver was Stefan Wohl, which raised another question that we would never get an answer to. How could the tank possibly have 800 pounds of waste in it? The tour started in June. The average person produces less than 1 pound of waste per day.
Și de ce mi-am amintit videoclipul ăsta? De asta, bro. Nelson Mondialu. Ăsta cred că e videoclipul.
Unde mere atâta căcat? Calculează câți oameni suntem pe globul pământesc și calculează numai 200 de grame de căcat fiecare să se cace o dată pe zi. Cu constipață n-avem treabă. Cu constipață merem că poate unul să cacă 300, poate unul să cacă 400. Și calculează la atâția oameni cât sunt pe pământul ăsta, cât căcat se adună. Calculează la atâția oameni cât sunt pe pământul ăsta, cât tișat se adună. Și calculează la atâția oameni cât sunt pe pământul.
Ce?
ăsta cât scuipă. Jos, vine ploaia și scuipă. Toate infecțiile astea.
Când bro zice că nu l-a luat. Următorul lucru pe care îl scoate pe gură.
The bus was only occupied by 2 people. 2 months of use would still only be about 120 pounds in most extreme cases. Since the band had 5 different buses and Dave says this particular bus was not the one he was on, how was that tank full? They were either letting a lot of people go to the bathroom on this specific bus during tour stops, or that thing was backed up from previous tours months or even years ago. But getting information out of this band wouldn't be easy. They knew discussing the matter publicly would result in a PR nightmare, and telling the truth would make...
Ce band existent pe lumea asta ar vrea să aibă treabă cu o situație de căcat?
them guilty. The band spokesperson, John Vlotten, said, "Our driver has stated that he was not involved in this incident. We reserve judgment on anyone until we have seen the evidence. We have been and will continue to be cooperative in this investigation." However, once the 2-week investigation had ended, the Illinois Attorney General's office filed a lawsuit against them. The suit accused the band and driver of violating state environmental and nuisance laws, seeking $70,000 in fines and an evaluation of the band's waste disposal practices. And after confirming the surveillance footage, the Attorney General told the press, "I had the authority to enforce our state's Environmental Protection Act, and that's the main statute that we used. Surely it was a count of water pollution. Surely there was a count for discharging a contaminant into a waterway without a permit, and I think we may have also charged public nuisance. It's a pretty broad statute to bring." As soon as the video came out, any attempts to deny that evaporated. Chicago's Mayor Daley also made a statement, but it was a little tone deaf and strange. He called the dumping absolutely unacceptable, but also said that the Dave Matthews Band was a very good band. The band's silence was heavily criticized, and eventually they felt the pressure to give a public statement, but they were reluctant to outright admit guilt. They did say that they care deeply about what happened and that they aren't attempting to avoid any responsibility they may have, and also that they didn't want to offend anyone. "We have fully and voluntarily cooperated with the Chicago authorities since the moment we heard about the incident. We provided photographs of any buses they requested, and we offered to supply DNA evidence to determine if one of our buses was the bus involved." So were they trying to get poop samples? "Our driver was the only person on the bus during the period relevant to this matter."
Bă, când când erai mic și te duceai cu maică-ta la analize și trebuia să-ți ia sample-uri de peste tot. Ioi, ce rău era,
And he has told us that he had nothing to do with this incident. We have not seen any of the other evidence in this case, and we have a few narrow but critical questions related to what we have seen of the evidence in the media. The statement was long, perfectly vague, but unfortunately, it didn't help their case. 2 months after the incident, the Dave Matthews Band realized the evidence was too strong to avoid guilt any longer. The band and their legal team agreed to pay $200,000 to a fund for environmental protection and other supportive projects. They also donated an additional $50,000 to the Friends of the Chicago River, who partly oversaw the ferry ride, and another $50,000 to the Chicago Park District. The group also agreed to keep records for the next 5 years detailing where and when the waste tanks on its tour buses are emptied while in Illinois. As for the driver, Stefan Wall, he pled guilty to the crime of dumping waste onto the public and into the river. It was the first time he admitted it publicly, and he was sentenced to 18 months of probation, 150 hours of community service, and received a $10,000 fine. Many people believe this was a mere slap on the wrist. The dumping of sewage could have seriously affected the health of the 2 pregnant women on the ferry, as well as the...
Ce asta?
See you when you close your eyes.
Eu s-a dus a meu cu sticla de 1 litru, nu pot să cred. Cu sticla de 1 litru, bro. Uite-te și tu. Bă, cum o scos, mă, ăsta atâta? 1 litru, o pus în sticle de Nesti sau de ce asta? Bă, în sticle de Nesti, de fuzetea. Săptămâna viitoare la treaba mare. Hai să intrăm să vedem o mai fost la treaba mare. Da, de fapt nu vreau să mă uit la așa ceva. Na, e prea cărți live-ul ăsta, mă jur.
Young children and a baby, plus the wheelchair-bound people who couldn't escape the fallout. All of the money the band paid out went straight to the government, and nothing went to the actual victims. In fact, part of the agreement was that the band was allowed to avoid admitting guilt in court, and it won a provision intended to make it more difficult for the tour boat operator and at least one passenger on the ill-fated cruise to use the settlements in their own lawsuits against the band. Like so many other things in life, ordinary people are the real victims and the government gets a big payday. Now this didn't prevent some passengers from taking the band to court.
Un borcan, uite-te. Am găsit, uite, săptămâna viitoare s-a dus la scaun. O dus borcanul, mâncați așa. Borcanul, doamne, de ce ne uităm la așa ceva? De ce suntem așa de interesați și de intuiți?
A woman by the name of Nancy M. Toder filed a lawsuit for emotional distress. She was celebrating her 46th birthday and she claimed the waste entered her eyes and mouth and covered her hair, clothing, and belongings. As a result, she suffered extreme nausea, vomiting, and related physical and emotional ailments and maladies and continues to suffer severe emotional distress. But it's unclear if she was ever able to reach a settlement. The only person who seems remotely apologetic from the band is Jerry Fitzpatrick, and he didn't have anything to do with it.
You know, it was a nasty mess. I couldn't imagine being the victim. I couldn't imagine that. This driver didn't use his head. He caused a lot of problems. You know, it's a matter of stopping at a regular place, hooking your hose up, and flipping that switch on your dash to letting it go in the proper place, and he didn't do that.
In May of 2005, the Dave Matthews Band attempted to prove they actually care for the environment in one of the worst ways possible. Matthews and Boyd Tinsley joined up with Ben & Jerry's to fight global warming with the release of an ice cream called Dave Matthews Band Magic Brownies. In 2009, Dave Matthews himself spoke about the incident on the Kara Karavu podcast. He said, "The bus driver lost his job and I didn't have my finger on the button, but it was one of our buses, wasn't mine, but it was one of the buses in my employment, and so I feel bad about it." He added, "It would be funnier if it were anyone else but me." Over time, the more serious aspects of Poopgate have been largely forgotten, and today it's laughed off as one big joke.
I think until maybe the day I die, I'll always be hesitant to walk under a bridge, or at least travel under a bridge. I definitely have a unique collection of colognes and deodorants, and I always have some baby wipes on me and lots of Purell.
Fake commemoration plaques have been zip-tied to the bridge to facetiously honor its history. The Chicago Hideout actually threw a dance party to celebrate the 20th anniversary. Even the Chicago Bulls organization has put in efforts to act like this incident was something the city should pay its respects to. But the Dave Matthews Band does not lean into the jokes. They remain pretty silent about the situation to this day. And after all these years, we still don't really have a true motive as to why Stefan Wool did this. It's hard to imagine it was a...
Căcat rău de tot, săracii, chiar rău de tot.